Hi, YouTube friends and family. Welcome back. Jess Christina here. I'd like to thank you for joining me for the second half of the list, running through a breakdown of 39 different bioagents and other chemical constituents that are found and known additives to chemical aerosolization purposes. So the first half of the list was about half of the list, and it took about 30 minutes to get through. The second half of the list takes a little bit longer to get through, but without further ado, let's get started. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to learn what you learn in this video, and I think you'll be a little bit shocked and horrified as well to what you learn in this video. So here we go. Okay, so the first one on the list is Nano-Aluminum-Coated Fiberglass. The number one benefit listed from this in the mainstream market is in the auto body and paint industry as a UV protection. So ultimately, I'm presuming that this is a refractory agent, but like any aerosolized aluminum, it has multiple adverse health effects, and these complications are found in multiple ecosystems. Basically, the entire biomass of the planet is affected by aluminum particulates. This is also very commonly known as chaff. It's linked to paranoia, mood instability, headaches, and similar to yellow fungal bacterium, it's also linked to Morgellons. So moving on, nitrogen trifluoride is next on the list. Now, this one is a very strong greenhouse gas. It's inorganic, and the best way I can describe it is that it's another binary agent, but truth be told, it's just nitrogen and fluoride. Has a musty odor, and if you are noticing a yellow presence in the clouds, then the nitrogen trifluoride is most likely present. It is one of the most common yellowing agents, but the way to tell the difference is if there's just aerosolization and not actual clouds, it will be very, very pale yellow. But if there's a lot of moisture in the clouds and it's actually mixing with moisture in the atmosphere, it turns it a very dark yellow. Um, it's This is caused by the presence of fluorine. That's atomic number 9, known as F on the periodic table, and I believe it's present for a lot of different factors, but mostly it's a super binary and electrically super active element. So this is another way that it's a mixing agent, it's a binary agent. It helps keep everything together. It helps keep it all stirred up in the pot. And you have a lot of different variations of these chemicals. Some of them convert to gases, and you need to be able to mix everything so that it comes equally out of the jet nozzles. You don't want things getting clogged. You don't want gases expanding and exploding. So I can't tell you what's in each tank specifically. I'm just giving the rundown of all of the chemicals. And we have to really just use that power of observation to see if there's dark yellow or a crimson hue or what colors those clouds are. And there's a few different colors associated. There's a couple of different colors, but a few different constituents associated with those colors. So as we go through each one, we're giving the presentation of what color it presents as, if it does present as a color. Anyway, it flows. Fluorine is one of the most active elements on the entire periodic table. It's very reactive to almost everything. And we all know the controversy of fluoride in the water. There's over 200 studies conducted on animals, all depicting various levels of fluoride damage in the brain. And these are multiple animals used, so it's not just lab rats, it's not just mice or monkeys. All of the animals used in all of the tests demonstrated damage to the brain. Furthermore, there were more than 64 studies done in humans, and those linked humans with moderate fluoride exposure, and that caused a reduction on intelligence in all 64 cases. So it literally slows down the thinking process. It reduces our ability to use critical thinking skills, and it promotes a more emotional reaction to situations. So instead of using that discernible thought to step back and assess the situation in its entirety, we are not critically thinking about our reactions and those consequences of our reactions. Okay, nickel is next. Its atomic number is 28. It's known as Ni on the table of elements. This is an excellent conductor and not just of electricity, but of heat as well. It's very common in the market. Everything from cheap pot metal jewelry to actual money contains nickel. If you've ever had the misfortune of wearing jewelry made with nickel for too long, you know that it causes irritating and painful rashes. Um, it's one of four elements that are magnetic at near room temperature. Those other ones are iron, cobalt, and gadolinium. Nickel is pretty stable, and that's why I think it's used. It has 28 protons, 28 electrons, 31 neutrons, so it's pretty stable. It's all really bad for us, though. It's very corrosive on cells. It's been linked to miscarriages, birth defects, nervous system disorders, and infertility. And we knew we'd see that on the list, didn't we? All right, polymer fibers is next. This one is really interesting, and it includes several non-organic compounds, but this combination is a binary agent, so it groups itself together. That's what polymer fibers do. They group together. Um, so this one is made with specific fibers like cotton or wood fibers, and they include these natural sugars from the natural fibers. So if you think about it for a second, one of the previous elements on the last video was arsenic. It affects the sugar backbone as well. The polymer fibers could be replacing these deficits after the split in the red blood cells and the white blood cells. So what if they're literally growing neural networks inside of our bodies by splitting and altering our DNA? We would not even need a neural link implant because those same nanofibers would already be found as particulates in our cells. And Morgellons, might I add, is the very same stuff on a much smaller scale that we find in these various compound versions. So these are things like fiber optic cables and other fibers used in textiles. So some of these textile fibers, like I said, wood and cotton, they're introduced to various polyethylene or polypropylene compounds, which are found in dyes, nylons, net. So all of these different compounds have a natural fiber with a chemical reaction that has strengthened it in some way. And I should also add that these polymers in the nanoparticulate form, they easily lodge into our skin like fiberglass. They become an irritant. We scratch, it pushes it further into the cell, into the subdermis, and it starts mixing into our own bodies. And our bodies probably don't react to it because it has all those other binary agents attached to it as well, like the DNA splicers, the desiccated red blood cells, etc., etc. So basically, it's biological warfare. All right, the next one is a bacteria, a very common one. It's called Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Pseudomonas aeruginosa. It's a pill-shaped bacteria. It's transinfectious, so it spreads from animals to humans. And there's also a version of it that spreads to plants. It is a very, very common bacteria in hospitals. You find it also in soil, in water, and it's mostly transmitted into our bodies through like open wounds, and in cases of hospital settings like ventilators, nasal cannulas, catheters, etc. So lesser known infections can cause things like damage to the soft tissue of the skin, causes dermatitis and other dermal or subdermal skin problems. So it's also very antibiotic resistant. It develops its own antibodies to these, and it really likes the moisture environments, so like the lungs, inner ears, eyes, um, places that have a lot of moisture in your body. Causes things like blood infections and pneumonia. So it's pretty serious business. All right, well, why spray it, right? This is one of the gamma protobacteria class, so it's a huge class of very common bacteria, and it has a lot of common ailments like respiratory infections. So when hospitals are seeing this and everything from burn victims to cystic fibrosis, cancer patients, patients with compromised immune systems like chemotherapy, AIDS, This one kills more than 2,500 people every year, and I honestly and wholeheartedly believe that this one is being added just as an agent of doom. There's no purposeful contaminant from the Pseudomonas classification that is necessary to be sprayed on the population whatsoever. And like I said, we're going to get into the Pseudomonas Fluorescens version in a moment. That is one that is the photobacteria, but this bacteria, it's very hard to recover from. It's very hard to handle. It's dangerous. It's common. And I also think it works in conjunction with aluminum to alter or stunt or essentially just halt production of cellular structure in humans, in flora and fauna. So let's talk about the flora for a minute. There's no benefit to spraying them either, although they do. They use it as a fungus control in the rhizosphere, so that's everything in the soil arena. It's similar to Pseudomonas, the last one that we talked about, but this one, this specific sequenced strain, is very, very damaging to plants. It's toxic to the soil, it's toxic to the bugs in the soil, everything in that rhizosphere. I think they're doing it to keep us ill as well as to reduce crop yields. So, like I said before, it also has luminescent properties, and it could potentially just absorb solar radiation, but that could do more harm than benefit too. So after weighing the costs and benefits, it's far more deadly than it is even worthwhile to mess around with. And one final note about these common deadly bacteria, they do love water, and they like areas that experience recurring moisture, so you should probably clean your shower head if you haven't in a while, because the bacteria in this water is most commonly found on the shower heads in our homes. This is something that is very deadly, like I said, and when it comes to contaminating the soil, it's not just contaminating one season or one round of crops. It's altering crops for seasons to come. Okay, next we're going radioactive, and we're going to talk about radioactive cesium. This is cesium-137, and cesium-137 is a radioactive isotope. It's from nuclear fission and the radioactive isotope uranium-235. But why is this present? Well, partially because of natural decay. And this is something that sticks around for a really long time in nature anyway. In fact, I think the half-life of some versions of cesium lasts over 2 million years. So we're seeing like 4.5 million year old decay of some of these atomic particles. But it really depends on which weighted version of cesium, because some cesium can decay in a matter of minutes. Others take up to 65 years, some take more, some take less. So it depends on which weighted structure we're talking about. Like cesium-135, it's got a very strong half-life, but it only lasts about 4 years, and it's relatively harmless. So I believe cesium-137 is used because of its properties to be another binary agent, and it's a really, really good particle transport. So in other words, it keeps it all together in that sludgy mix of chemical crap. It's a beta and gamma emitter, so it wreaks havoc on soft tissue and also causes respiratory problems. And that's what beta and gamma emitter means, that one is skin absorbed and one is inhaled. So radiocesium is present mostly in atomic clouds. So even if you're thinking about Chernobyl or Fukushima or Hiroshima, a lot of the radioactive cesium that's present has multiple effects. So it refracts the sunlight back into space, it blocks the light from the clouds itself, plus the radioactivity on the ground that's falling onto the ecosystem down below, it wreaks havoc on all cellular structure beneath it or that gets caught up in its winds. So this is people, animals, plants, soil, everything. And to date, they still have to evacuate areas because of this radioactive fallout. And one specific reference to Fukushima, there was an oceanographer who was very, very concerned about radioactive cesium, radiocesium, we'll call it. in ocean levels after the Fukushima Daiichi meltdown. And as you remember, there was a 9.0 earthquake in 2011 in Japan that caused this meltdown. Well, a lot of radioactive waste was spilling into the oceans, and there was no accountability to measure this. No world government stepped up to be able to go out and measure worldwide where it was going in the currents. They were just waiting till it got to their shores, and they were measuring, taking shore samples. Well, one oceanographer took it upon himself via a crowdfunding project, of all things. Talk about dedication. Well, he was very concerned about it, so he started measuring. He got his project together, and I'll put the link to this below so you can read more about it. But he was measuring levels near Hawaii as high as 50,000 parts per million of radioactive cesium. So this is really, really concerning because these high concentrated levels were found right after the event, thousands of miles away. And we're finding it not only in the Pacific Northwest, but also in Italy and a lot of places around the world. So it's really, really discerning to know that these areas, there's nothing we can do to help them come back from this. It's just going to take time. All right, the next one on the list is radioactive thorium. This one is a bit of an interesting story because thorium could be used to make reactors, but sadly, governments want uranium, it's significantly more unstable, mostly because okay, first of all, with thorium, there is little to no waste. That is why it would be a much more stable isotope to use in a reactor. But because it's not capable of making that reactionary explosion like plutonium would, even though it is more stable, they are going with the less stable one, getting rid of thorium, not using it, and using uranium instead because they want the byproduct plutonium. So, there's high concentrated levels of thorium in my own state, in Idaho. Over near the Idaho-Montana border area, there's old uranium mine sites, but there's a huge thorium vein under the Idaho-Montana border area in the Lemhi Pass in the mountains. It's been really controversial, but so far they haven't been able to do any kind of mining there because it is such a pristine wilderness area. There's a lot of fantastic hiking, recreational trails, wildlife in the area, and to go in and mine that area would really just destroy the ecosystem. So I think someday if they have their way, they'll get to it because we're talking like 185,000 metric tons under there. So I would like to see it become a wildlife refuge or some kind of nature preserve or something just to protect the area, but so thorium, I think they're using it as an agent in the spray because of its ability to trap heat. It's used as a refractor. It's an element TH. It's number 90 on the periodic table. And this one also can be found in fuel emissions. So I think it's mostly present because thorium doesn't really break down. It melts at like 8,000 degrees Fahrenheit, but so there's costs and benefits. It's stable but unstable. There's a danger to using thorium, and that's called protactinium. It decays in reactors to produce uranium-234. So there's particulates present, but when these atomic structures start to decay, they convert. So for example, as uranium-238 decays, the nucleus in it results in thorium-234 and other byproducts like lead-206, but the more the nucleus decays, it results in protactinium-234, which then turns into a decay of a daughter cell, uranium-234, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, the breakdown occurs, it kind of forms a chain of elemental decomposition, but again, I'll put a link to this reactionary chain of decay below. Just know that thorium is widely present, and breathing it in large amounts especially can cause metal poisoning and just death. Okay, next on the list is selenium, and I think they're using this one also to deflect the sun's heat. It's pretty controversial because some scientists argue that it actually traps heat and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, causing more problems. And, for a million years, we've been able to not have to intervene with the earth. It has these natural cycles. And I think the general consensus is that it's just a really bad idea to spray, especially being at solar minimum right now. We're expecting fewer solar flares, fewer coronal mass ejections, and fewer gamma rays. So we're having less solar radiation coming towards the Earth, and the Earth does not need our help cooling off. If anything, the real reason they're spraying is the expected intent of blocking these harmful gamma rays. But then again, we have those natural protections in place. So I don't think it's a good idea. All right, selenium though. Selenium is element Se. It's number 34 on the periodic table. And in industry, it's used in bioagents, but only in trace amounts. We do have selenium in our bodies. We need it for proper cognitive abilities, reproductive capabilities in men and women. But again, high doses of selenium can cause a vast array of health complications, everything from nausea, organ damage, all the way up to death at high enough concentrations. It causes organ failure, heart failure, liver failure, kidney failure. So repeated high concentrations, it is pretty dangerous. Okay, moving on. Next is Serratia Marcescens. This is a very opportunistic little rod-shaped bacteria, and it causes everything from eye infections to lung infections. It is incredibly resilient. It's actually one that was weaponized by the US military in experiments being carried out in the 60s by unsuspecting citizens. And this was sprayed over cities, and unknowing to humans, they were used as the guinea pigs for biological warfare test experiments. But how many people do you know right now with respiratory infections? Seriously, every time they spray, I wonder what mix they're delivering to us. So this is another responsible party for making clouds red. So if you see crimson, again, it is not from blood in the clouds, people. This is a bacterial reaction with the moisture in the clouds. The wetter and more full of rain the clouds are, the darker the red it will be. So you get a double dose when it does rain. And this causes coronary and pulmonary complications. So people who have a really hard time with the moisture in the air, it's not just the water, it's the chemicals in the moisture in the air. It's very widespread. Um, they say they often blame contact with like dirty door handles, dirty hand soap pumps, and other environmental factors like hospitals and care facilities. It is a common killer, but it grows in distilled water, it grows in antiseptics, it grows on and around antimicrobial hand pumps, and it can be passed with a handshake. So again, wash your hands. Okay, sharp titanium shards is next, and this one is exactly what the name indicates. Sharp shards of titanium. So these are also have a refractory pretense, but most notably and dangerously, this lodges into the skin. It works its way in there and it can cause skin irritation, but it acts as a catalyst for infection. So when it gets under the dermis, it's easier for bacteria to enter the body. This can also wreak havoc on your lungs. It has some uses in industry, but most of what you'll find on any regular Google search for sharp titanium shards garners the results of a video game. So still, titanium in industry is toxic. And many, many years ago, I worked in the office at an auto body shop, and I got to see firsthand all of the toxic constituents in paints and bondos and reducers and hardeners and clear coats. And what I can say is that sharp titanium shards are one of the metals present in pearlescent paints. So there's mica and other things in there too, but titanium dioxide is definitely present. And I think this one has a dual role in spray, one for the refractive purposes and the other for its ability to lodge in our skin. Titanium is an element, it's Ti, it's atomic number 22, and it does not corrode, so I think that is another reason that it's used. Okay, next is silver. This is a metal present in aerosolization, and I think it's part of the refractory attempt again. I don't specifically think they're doing this like a Monty Burns style to make the earth dark, but I think they're doing the solar radiation refraction. So silver iodide is not what's normally used to make snow at resorts, but it can make snow. It is, however, the stuff that they use to seed the clouds. In Idaho, my state, again, Idaho Power is the company claiming responsibility for cloud seeding to, quote, coax more snow out of winter storms, end quote. And that was from the Idaho Statesman, our newspaper here in Boise. That was from July 25th, 2019, so just a little over 6 months ago. And it's discerning because it's right above my head. This is a company I pay money to every month. And it's funny too because they admit that not much moisture in there actually becomes snow. Most of the vapors just keep blowing downwind in the air currents. So, all right, to conclude, silver is a natural element, of course. It's found on the table under Ag. It's atomic number 47, 47 electrons, 47 protons. It's what's known as a transitional metal. Basically, what that means is the electrons can be found in two shells instead of just one. And there are videos on transitional metals, and you can watch them if you want to learn more about this. But silver is very reflective. It's also very malleable. You know, you can pull it together in a wire, you can hammer it flat, you can manipulate it. It's sprayed as a nanoparticulate, though, and I think it's being sprayed at this point because not only does silver have the highest electrical conductivity of all metals, it also has high thermal conductivity, and it is a natural refractor. So commonly in industry, it's used for more than just jewelry. We find it in everything from dental fillings to instruments, photography, mirrors, and even nuclear reactors. And one final note before I move forward, and we're almost finished, but I want to say that all of these refractants are also conductors. They aid the atmospheric conductivity, and I think this also lends to the 5G networks. And I think they do this far in advance of 5G being fully implemented. I think this is the case to aid the connections between the Gwen towers, those big, ugly, unsightly, quote unquote, cell towers. They're called Gwen, GWEN towers, and these particulates in the atmosphere, including plasma charge, aid in transmission from tower to tower. Okay, moving on. Streptomyces is next. This is another nasty little bacteria. There's actually quite a few articles found on streptomyces. It resembles a fungi mostly because of its ability to line up like spores into rows. It's actually a gram-positive bacteria, and most that we've seen on the list before are gram-negative, but this one is gram-positive. So the gram scale is like a dye test, okay? It's not an atomic weight property, it's a test. And um, the cell in question would have a violet stain. So they put the violet stain in the cell, and then they use a color remover, and then they add a red stain. And if it's a gram-positive cell, then it denotes a violet appearance. So this one has that. It's more technical than just all that, but just in reference for this particular bacteria, it can be detected by using gram test methods. So it's really about the cell wall and the common surface surrounding of the gram-positive cells. They're known as glycopeptides, and this is a component that most antibiotics utilize for the function of killing them, you know? Ultimately, I guess just to make it simple, an antibiotic would attack a cell wall, but for spores with no cell wall, that typically won't work. Um, we've talked about this in the last video as well when we were talking about fungi. So, why spray it? Well, it's already used in plant control, and studies do indicate that it's being used as a potentially less harmful way to control plant and soil fungus, but I don't know what the alternative to that would be. Um, it does kill fungal and bacterial pathogens, but the more I read about the uses for streptomyces, the more I decided that because of the nature of the pathology, that this bacteria is actually being used because of its core functionality, and that is to break down the insoluble plant sugars. And it breaks it from cellulose and chitin, and it makes it readily absorbable for reuptake. So it's morphable, and it creates a chain. And, we talked about the antibiotic resistant properties. We talked about its ability to form a chain, but then we also revisited sugars now 3 times. The first time that we talked about sugars was on the backbone of our very DNA. And the second time was splicing with the sugar DNA structure as a particulate contaminant. Okay. And then the third one here, we're talking about insoluble plant sugars that are left over from these streptomyces that can help deposit this bacteria into our own bodies. So um, I think it is used in some antibiotics, but again, mold creates its own antibody, okay? And that's what creates the antibiotic. Penicillin, you use the penicillin antibody. Streptomyces is found in a lot of different antibiotics. It's a binary agent and a way to also feed and immunize the other gram-negative bacteria against the positive functions of antibiotics when we're fighting streptomyces. So I think, like with any overuse of an antibiotic, these infectious agents can learn to overcome the effects of antibodies. So ultimately, we are making the other bacteria in the spray immune to antibiotics. So we know that there are only so many antibiotics that can treat bacteria. And once you get through those regimens, if nothing works, you're pretty much out of options. There's not an unlimited supply of different types of antibiotics. And I think this is being sprayed, like I said, to program these other biological agents and contaminants as a way to make us less resilient and less capable of fighting them off. Okay, next on the list is one I think a lot of people have been waiting for, and that is strontium. It's an alkaline metal. It will wreak havoc on your cells. Its atomic name is SR. Its atomic weight is 38. It's highly reactive, and this one also turns clouds yellow. It's used in bone cancer treatments, and like 99% of concentrated levels in the body accumulate in the bones. It's also used in sensitive toothpaste and dietary supplements for brittle bones. Sadly, though, the powers at the World Health Organizations label strontium as possibly safe when taken by mouth for bone treatments and likely safe when brushed with. So I really don't appreciate labels like likely or possibly, because it's also known that high doses are possibly unsafe and likely unsafe. There's warnings for pregnant women not to use things like Sensodyne toothpaste, people with high blood pressure, heart disease, also people with clotting issues, arterial issues, kidney problems, blood clot disorders. Pretty much any internal condition should not be exposed to high levels of strontium. Furthermore, it interacts with stomach acid, so if you take antacids, it strongly counteracts it, reacting to the aluminum and other chemicals in the antacids. So it also reacts to estrogen in women and androgens in males. Hormone supplement therapy people, it will make your body less able to get rid of strontium. It should also be noted with some of those hormone replacement therapies, you really need to know what the sources are, because they might be sources you don't agree with, especially if you're a vegan. Like Premarin for women, do you know that that's just an abbreviation for pregnant mare urine? They literally keep horses pregnant, keeping them in stalls. They collect the urine, they extract the elevated hormone from it, and they make a pill for women. And that is gross to me, and it makes me feel really bad for the horses. So, anyway, moving on. Strontium is one that I did a lot of research on, and this is actually, I found like 450 pages that I wanted to get through, and sadly, I just had to skim through some of them. But strontium we know is toxic, and it's one that people really mention when they talk about barium, strontium, aluminum, or strontium, aluminum, lithium. It's one that often comes up in discussions of chemical aerosolization. And I think that it's very important to talk about, because Strontium, we are trusting big pharma to have full disclosure to us, and we might not be understanding what we're using in our bodies that eventually could build up into toxic levels. So strontium is also what makes fireworks red, and you'll notice it as a red tint in clouds. Um, in conjunction with other chemicals that we see on the list that are red and yellow. Strontium binds with calcium and barium. That's why they use it in bones, because it binds with calcium. And those are two registries that we've already covered on this list. So strontium is not soluble in water, but it does slowly react to water and it turns it into a gas. And this is also the reason I didn't get this video done yesterday, because I read a lot about strontium again. And this was one of the most interesting aspects to me, because then I started thinking, well, what if it reacts with the water in your body and becomes a gas? But it's different. It's different when they use it for bone treatment. So ultimately, what I learned about strontium here is that the CDC has collected some pretty intense experiments. So I'm going to link you with some references below. And we're talking about everything from skin tumors to eyelid scarring from drop doses in kids. And I can't even cover it all here. The test that they did using strontium on people, on human subjects, is horrifying. High levels cause bone cancer, leukemia, skin and lung problems, and so much more. And like I said, it reacts with water slowly, causing a gas. I think that's for the bonding abilities. I think that's what they use it for in the spray, because how it keeps all these sprayed particulates aerosolized. It keeps them from just falling to the ground like rain. And strontium bromide reacts with hydrogen, causing a very strong acid to form. And this hydrobromic acid can cause tissue and eye damage, rashes, burns. It can damage your mucous membranes when you inhale it. So strontium overall is horrifying to even work with in a controlled setting. All right, moving on. We're going to talk about sub-micron particles here, since we're talking about aerosol particles anyway. This is a very odd registry, but sub-micron particles are really just particles that are of a sub-micron scale. And a micron is very, very small. It's a nanoparticulate, but it measures less than a millionth of a meter, which makes it less than a wavelength of light, which also makes it very hard to review under a microscope. Some unidentified particulates are simply non-identifiable particulates, and most likely smaller versions of the same or other matter designed in this actual aerosolization process. So it's probably nanoparticulates of the same bacteria classifications, but they're so small we can't recognize them, but they are so small so they could be emitted as an aerosol. And I think the pharmaceutical industry with these submicron particles actually does have a way to identify them. There is a submicron particle identifier. It's called Archimedes. And it can determine biomass from silicones, but it has this functionality now. So another function of these submicron particles is the ability to be controlled by vast temperature variance. So you can freeze them, but also it can be manipulated via means of waves. Let that sink in, okay? It can be frozen, but it can also be manipulated via means of waves to heat rapidly. This is very discerning, considering all the wave-generated technologies and advancements in wave weaponry. And one thing I do want to say is that these worldwide phenomena are being openly discussed in countries who are not afraid of releasing their findings. One particular group of scientists at the Department of Physics in Jordan reviewed these particulates over a city in Jordan, and they measured these levels. They discovered that during the workday, the particulates were much higher than at other times, and they also discovered that during the winter months, December through February, had the highest concentrations, and they were elevated significantly over the months of June through September. So this study was called the Urban Aerosol Particle Size Characterization in Eastern Mediterranean Conditions. And I will put the link below. They have some really remarkable findings, but in summary, these physicists directly mention the effects of submicron particles and what they do to our blood and our organs. And they're quite detailed and descriptive again, so visit the link below. I'm merely referencing them and the study. It's a recent study too, but I want to reiterate that not only is it a worldwide situation, that labs all around the world in universities are working on the same discoveries, but Western research is much different than the rest of the world, and I'm not always saying that it's better. We are smart in our scientific communities, of course, but we're not as open about our advancements all the time in some areas, and we even outsource pharmaceutical research at times. I came across a headline as I was searching, and it's called "The US Has a Lot of Money, but It Doesn't Look Like a Developed Country." And I'm going to put the link to this one below too. But this was written by a woman named Annalisa Morelli, and she wrote this in 2017. But she provides some very interesting statistics. Did you know that the US spends roughly 17% of the GDP on healthcare, but we're the only advanced nation in the world not to have full healthcare coverage for our citizens? We have the second highest rate of poverty in the world, the lowest level of food quality in the world. Some of it's not even food. Maternal mortality rates have increased over the past 2 decades. Education is a joke. We have less than adequate test scores, but the highest costing degrees in the world. Now, we do excel in some areas like access to energy and gender equality and employment, but this also garners us the highest level of inequality in the world, significantly over other nations, every other nation. And while Morelli did report these positive statistics as a good thing, the access to energy has become questionable lately because we know what's happened in California over the past fire season. And as far as the quality of women feeling safe, well, I'm a woman and I am smart enough to know that there are some neighborhoods that I will not go into day or night because I don't feel safe. And maybe it's perspective, but I think a lot of women feel that way. We're smart enough to know not where we are not supposed to go. Um, anyway, we were talking about the discussion of submicron particles from our Jordan physicists. So their study is also remarkably well done. So please check them out. And I will definitely make sure I put the links to both of them below. So moving on, sulfur dioxide is next, and this comes as a gas. It's also responsible for acid rain. It's nasty, it's toxic, it's mostly caused by humans, like 99% of the time, but it's natural too, only under harsh conditions though. One example is the sulfur dioxide emissions from large volcanic blasts, like a pyroclastic blast if a volcano erupts. If a cloud is big enough, the emissions will not only block out the sun from the cloud itself, but sulfur refracts solar rays and it sends them back into space. So I think this is why the additive is present, obviously as a solar refractor, but it's also carcinogenic and it causes respiratory problems. It also destroys the ozone. And one particular study conducted by the UN's International Maritime Organization stated that because of the high sulfur content, 3.5%, in shipping fuels, that they were actually responsible for aiding in planetary cooling. But since the new laws discovered the dangerous effects on people, the planet, the atmosphere, and basically everything, they ordered stronger sanctions, and this reduced the fuel content of sulfur to less than 1.5%. So that change, they said, would create more carbon dioxide emissions, which is just a different alternative repercussion. But sulfur dioxide is used as a food additive, as a preservative, and 1 in 9 asthmatics report their symptoms worsen after drinking a soda or beverage, should I say, with high sulfur content. So this comes from PubMed. Okay, this is a lot of information can be found here on sulfur dioxide. And a lot of information is present on food additives, and these sulfur contents are high in sodas, dried fruits, etc. So you can look it up if you want to find the full list, but it's also used as a refrigerant. It's a disinfectant because of its antimicrobial properties, and we recognize it by different names when we use it in different compounds. Like as a food additive, we see it called E220, but in things like drinks, they just call them sulfites. So any wine drinkers out there, you know what sulfites are, and it's responsible for your hangover. The higher concentration of sulfites, the more of a headache you get. In the atmosphere, it smells like burnt matches, and in this state, it's very, very toxic. It's a toxic corrosive gas. Okay, next is unidentified bacteria. And I think this one is on the list just because it's a combination of what we've already covered between the submicron particles and the fact that they're hard to identify under the microscope because of their extremely small size. So I think there's also some mutant bacteria strains in here that are being created by mixing and strengthening the current bacterial compositions that we already know. So ultimately, I think they're a stage of new superbugs that are antibiotic resistant because we are feeding them the bacterial immunities in with the spray. So I'm not going to talk much about unidentified bacteria, but coronavirus, we all see what's going on here with new bacteria that cannot be fought. So, this classification system of bacteria is huge. There's a lot of things in it, and I'm not saying that any specific one on the list doesn't have some other mutated version of something else in the classification system with it that we haven't caught. But I will say that some of these microbacterial particulates have been identified. And these are just smaller versions of the typical size cells like mycotoxins and E. coli and much, much more. So they're the mini-me versions of the regular form, capable of being aerosolized better, thus better able to be inhaled, stay in the air longer, lodge deep into your lungs, make you sicker. So, okay, next is uranium, and element number 92. We find it under the letter U on the periodic table. And this one, it's pretty commonly known by name, but uranium has some terribly adverse health effects too. It can be deadly. It's not uncommon. It's readily used in energy production, and we mine over 60,000 tons of uranium every year worldwide, so why would we spray it? Well, again, it's a bioagent aimed at population control. It has such strong health effects and adverse reactions, but notably from munitions and inhalation of gun and bomb smoke. So it's a common byproduct of battlefields with notable effects on soldiers and residents in the area. Uranium drastically increases the risk of cancer, birth defects in babies, diabetes, thyroid malformations, and all I can say about depleted uranium is World health officials know about it. They're aware of these devastating effects, but they continue to use it. And I think they do that because of industry and money. I believe it's part of that gentle genocide agenda. And if you want to know more about it, I really think it goes all the way back to the CFR and the trilateralist agendas. Those have been set into motion since the 60s, but please use the link below to read the document. You'll be quite disgusted, I hope at least. I hope it brings you a new level of awareness of what's been going on for decades now. I did study herbalism. I am writing a book on it. And one of the websites that I do enjoy is called Rocky Mountain Institute on Herbalism. And I found some really great studies and correlations with uranium and other links to uranium and bioweaponry, but I'll leave that link below too. I believe this site also references the Haig-Kissinger reports. So I think you should go and read those as well. Uranium not only kills you, it makes you want to die. And people suffering radioactive fallout are only focusing on their slow and imminent death. So uranium-234 has the shortest half-life of like 245,500 years. I think uranium-235, one of its radioactive isotopes, is the only naturally occurring isotope capable of sustaining a nuclear fission reaction. An isotope is a version of an element with a differing number of neutrons in its nucleus. So uranium is vast, and knowing which isotope you're working with will generally tell you how stable it is, but uranium is responsible for everything from the Hiroshima little boy to radioactivity first discovered a couple hundred years ago by Marie Curie. And there's so much to be said about uranium, but I'll let you do further research on it on your own if you'd like. It's very commonly known, it's a very fast killer, and it has no cure. So last on our list is yellow fungal mycotoxins. Now, we reviewed this in the last video. They're based from mold. We discussed in this section um, these mycoplasma, and we learned the adverse health effects and everything from neurological complications, Parkinson's, ALS, cancer, headaches, respiratory distress, and much more. It's part of what makes yellow clouds yellow, and as a fungal toxin, it has resistance to antibiotics. It's widely found in the larger bacterial classifications, and these mycotoxins are actually used in military biological testing. It's referred to as yellow rain. So in summary, I'd like to just close by saying that these chemicals are no longer a secret. Universities worldwide are releasing studies on these effects. The Navy and the government hold the patents readily found in the patent office. And of course, the president has openly allowed funding to the tune of $4 million this year alone to make these operations of aerosolization better. I will no longer debate whether or not chemtrails exist. They do. 2 years ago, I didn't believe it, and then I did something that any good researcher would do. I listened with an open mind, and I started reading the evidence. And I did the groundwork to disprove it, but instead I found undeniable evidence to the contrary. So my own confirmation and information biases stood in the way of my believing until I got the right information. So just because you don't have the information for something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Chemical aerosolization has been around for more than 6 decades. They sprayed our parents, they sprayed our grandparents, they spray us, our children, and our grandchildren, but it's never expected to stop. They specifically state that once implemented, it could never be stopped or adverse reactions would occur, rapidly accelerating global temperatures. So I believe this is a ruse. It's a cover story to get unsuspecting citizens on board to approve it and to support and to ignore these chemtrails. And all we have to do is look up. And like I say all the time, the power of observation is so powerful. It provides knowledge and allows us to have credible discernment about a subject. If I observe something in the sky with these jets and I see them starting and stopping and turning on and turning off their spray, then I have undeniable validation that what I'm seeing with my own eyes is evidence enough. And what we really need to ask ourselves is, do we really fully understand all of these bio-altering components of these chemicals when they're mixed? We might not, but whoever the mad chemist was that made this death concoction was a true madman, an evil scientist. And we have reviewed not only solar refractor agents, but the very chemicals and bioagents present to act as binary agents with our own physical bodies, internalized in so many different ways, from inhalation to topically to ingestion. And they splice our DNA code. They make us sick. They cause such a wide array of health complications because everything from cognizance impairments, skin tumors, organ failure, cancer, to death. And anyone with any discerning thought left in their own head at all should understand the possible tipping point as a no turning back scenario for humanity. What happens when we reach a toxic level that we can't recover from? We're spraying components that don't decay for hundreds of thousands of years. When the soil is so contaminated that nothing grows, and the air is so polluted that we can't breathe, and of course, when the world dies of cancer and the only ones left who can heal themselves from it are the ones who stole the secrets, then we're doomed. There are cures to cancer, but they don't benefit the agenda of the big money or big pharma, so they'd rather you go through chemo and go through all of that hardship than utilize a quicker and more affordable method to recovering and healing, because it doesn't put that much money in their pockets. And one thing I've learned over my years as a medical and mental health provider is that the medical field is full of those who listen and prescribe accordingly. It's a revolving door, and you better plan on spinning wildly once you get into that system, because most doctors or hospitals, they get kickbacks for using new drugs. It's an incentive to them. The Hippocratic Oath doesn't mean what it used to, and most doctors are just following their indoctrinations to follow routine procedure. They have no discernible thought of their own. They have been programmed, and we are the guinea pigs. But in the eyes of the elite, we're just the expendable. So this is what the entire agenda is about: order out of chaos. The chaos they create now is the distraction of nonsense that makes our heads spin. And those are all to benefit them, to have us look the other way. They're conditions set to make us act with our emotions instead of our minds. And we need to stop reacting negatively and start making sound decisions as a whole for the greater good of all of humanity. Because it's not about us, it's about future generations to come too. And we do not have a right to do that to all of humanity. So we need to stop being distracted by these distractions, and don't let the internet occupy your mind. Right now, we have highly capable leaders, but they're not the ones in various positions of leadership. Those men are merely puppets with one nefarious agenda, and it all ends from money and control, and it's all about power. There's another website that comes to mind called aircrap.org. It's pretty remarkable in the scope of data that it provides, and everything from live maps to reports on Morgellons. So I'll put that link below too. I'd like you to read further articles and evidence about this. But the terrifying capabilities of all of these chemicals when mixed together not only causes health complications like we talked about, but these biological agents are capable of splitting our DNA as well as our red and white blood cells. They cause mutations, they cause cancers, they have additives that make them almost mandatory for the bioagent, like a mold or a bacteria, to replace or bind with our severed cells. So it is biological warfare. Not only are they spraying it on us, they're splicing it into our very cellular structures. And are they using these mutations to pass on those genetic differences to our children? So, like, we're some weird scientific biological experiment? I really don't know. I don't have the answers, but all I do know is that the effects of continuous spraying will not matter in regards to sun or solar radiation levels on the ground, because life will no longer exist on the planet. So temperature will be a moot point. But one thing's for certain: these genetic mutations are passed down to our children. They alter the DNA code for the future of anyone in your lineage from here on out. It doesn't just automatically go back when you have kids. It gets passed on as a mutated genetic effect. So two people with mutations breed, and who knows what sort of mutation will exist in future populations. We're currently seeing these genetic mutations in bacteria. Again, the coronavirus is a perfect example right now. And unfortunately, people spread it by breathing, and most people don't stay home when they're sick anymore either. Nobody takes time for bed rest until they push themselves so far they either end up in the hospital or they're so sick they have no choice. So, okay, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a very interesting and scary list, and I will get to the final comparison video. I want to review the Navy's names of toxic chemicals, but it should be quick because we've already reviewed most of those same elements in the list that we just covered. So, thanks again for joining me, and don't forget to check out the links below. Just Christina, signing out.